Welcome to Take Command, a Dale Carnegie podcast, the show where we seek to uncover what leadership means in today's world. I'm Joe Hart, CEO of Dale Carnegie, and we'll be talking to diverse leaders with stories to tell across various industries to help unlock your potential for success. We'll be sharing real-life insights into leadership, which in turn can help spark the next level of your growth as a leader. In his time as an executive, today's guest has weathered storms of change, gales of growth, and the ever-shifting culture of the American workplace. We'll cover off on a wealth of his experiences, including his time at Toys R Us, Benjamin Moore Paint, and how one of his biggest mistakes and failures also became one of the most valuable lessons of his life. He reports directly to Warren Buffett and is a consultant for Berkshire Hathaway. I'm happy to welcome to the show Mike Searles.
Pleasure to be here, Joe.
Mike, I know that everyone is really excited to hear from you. You've had a phenomenal career, most recently which you were the CEO of Benjamin Moore Paint, billion-dollar paint company, reporting to Warren Buffett directly. So I definitely want to ask you in a moment what it's like to work with Warren Buffett. What is he like? But before I do, I know that you are today an in-house consultant for Berkshire Hathaway. You still report to Warren Buffett. Tell us what that means.
Well, when I told Warren and Greg Abel, who's his number 2 vice chairman, that I was going back to California, he asked me if I would consider being an in-house consultant. And I found out that Berkshire Hathaway is unique in so many wonderful ways. One of them is they really don't like outside consultants. And so what they have done is some of the CEOs who have reached maturity, as we would say,
right,
are on a short list to be called upon by Berkshire Hathaway in the event that a company, one of 64, probably now 70 companies that Warren owns, needs some help in some way. And if our skill set fits, then we'll get a call and we'll go help.
So you are on call to help other companies, other CEOs in the Berkshire Hathaway universe, so to speak.
24/7.
Wow. All right. And you're just getting started with that. I mean, how's that going so far?
The wonderful part about leaving Benjamin Moore is I left it in the hands of a wonderful CEO who had actually been with the company for 32 years. So having left that in good hands, and he's a young man that's got a long, bright future, and I was worried about what am I going to do? And so this is a wonderful transition. I get to spend time in California, and then as assigned, I can travel around the country and maybe do some good for some others and still be part of the Berkshire family.
Well, it's a great testament to you, because I think your original intention was to retire, as you said, and it sounds like Warren Buffett said we can't let you do that.
Well, and Greg Abel, his number 2, was very kind and asked me if I would be interested, and I said absolutely yes.
Awesome. Tell us, what is it like to work with, report to Warren Buffett?
It's a question I get asked a lot, and I love to answer it. He's revered for so many wonderful reasons, and certainly his financial success is well documented. But the person that we get to see, having worked for Berkshire Hathaway, is really the unique part. The integrity, the transparency, and the humility that somebody who's achieved that success is able to demonstrate in both business and human terms every day is an inspiration, just an inspiration to observe. And it makes you proud to be part of a company with a leader that has those kinds of qualities and instills them in the managers of the companies that he runs.
And how does he do that? What are some of the ways you saw him be a model and instill those values?
Well, there's public ways that if you've ever seen on Yahoo Finance, one of the annual Berkshire Hathaway meetings, Warren never talks about his successes. What he talks about is his failures. I should have bought Amazon, and I didn't. And I was a fool. I missed it. I mean, here's a guy who's arguably the most successful investor of the 20th century, and he's talking about the things that he didn't do right. And that's an example for all of us. It's not about all the things we did right. What could I have done better? What could I have seen that I didn't see? So that's on the public side. And on the private side, the degree to which Warren works to enforce intellectual honesty, transparency, and integrity, and you've heard me quote a letter in a speech before about he sends each CEO each year a letter without going into all of the contents. The key point is the most important thing we have at Berkshire Hathaway is a reputation. We can afford to lose money. We can afford to lose a lot of money. But what we can't afford to do is lose one shred of our reputation. And if you see any activity that rises to that level, you call me. But you should should understand that if you have any question as to whether something might be a little questionable, you're better off walking away. There's plenty of money to be made by hitting the ball in the center of the court, and if it's close to the line, just assume it's out. So I've memorized this letter. I give a copy of it to every associate that ever joined the company, and it just talks to the importance of integrity and ethics and honesty and transparency in business. And if more companies operated like that, I think the world would be a better place.
Well, it's phenomenal. And it started with Warren really having a zero tolerance policy for any kind of unethical behavior, which, especially these days where there are leadership crises politically, in business and so forth, it really starts with usually a breakdown in trust.
And he enforces it. He owns close to 70 companies. To my knowledge, I think the only one he ever sold was in 1970. So he buys companies and he keeps them. He will turn CEOs, and I was the third CEO in 18 months. And the reason for the CEO's departures were not lack of performance in business. It was questionable performance on areas of transparency and integrity. And if he sees a hint of that, then he acts on it.
Mike, one of the things I want to ask you a little bit about, which I think you're touching on, is culture and how to really build great cultures and the kind of advice you'd have for other people. But before I get into that, let's just back up about you. Tell us a little bit about your background, how you got started in business. You've had really an illustrious career.
Well, now that I'm approaching 71, I'm going to cut this really short, okay? Went to school in Vermont and got an affinity for retail because I paid my way through school by working in a ski shop. Knew I had an affinity for merchandising and selling and took a job in a department store, a small regional department store on the East Coast out of school. And spent 12 years there and went from the trainee up to the president of the company in the course of 12 years. And it was at that point that I thought the world was perfect and nothing needed to change. And then I got a call from one of the mentors that were at the beginning of my life named Charles Lazarus, who was the founder of Toys R Us. And there's a story there that we probably don't have time for about an interview that should have never occurred.
But you learned something from that interview.
I did.
Do you want to share what you learned? Because that could be valuable for really anyone in any stage of their career. You really had a defining moment.
Full disclosure. One of the lessons I learned early in my career as a result of this was being prepared. And you never know what opportunity is going to come your way on what day of the week. And you should always be prepared for what doors might open. And so I got called for an interview to meet the founder of Toys R Us during the glory days when they were the biggest gorilla in the jungle in the category killer process. Wasn't really interested in going to a toy store because I was a department store guy, and that was where the world began and ended. But I wanted to see what I was worth. So I went to the interview for entirely the wrong reason and sat down on the 23rd floor of Korn Ferry, and in the course of 5 minutes realized I was sitting with a genius. This is a guy who, in his era, was to retail what Jeff Bezos and Amazon are in our world today. Mm-hmm. He had taken a category killer approach and taken toys out of the department store and into his world. Well, make a long story short, he had opened one prototype store of a new concept called Kids R Us, which he was interviewing me for to be president. And he said to me, "What did you think of the store?" Now, the store was 4 miles from where I lived.
And he knew that. He knew that it was right where you...
Yep. And so I thought I could either try to fake this or I can be honest. And so I said, "Mr. Lazarus, I haven't seen the store." And his face turned red. He pushed himself back from the table, got up, left the room and said, "Young man, this interview's over."
Wow.
And so I went home and told my wife that I had just lost the opportunity of a lifetime to learn from a genius, and I wasn't prepared. And it was a humiliating experience.
And for most people, that'd be the end of the story.
That most people, that would be the end of the story.
Yes.
I have a wife who I credit for my success who said, "Why don't you write him a letter?" I said, "Oh, what good is a letter going to do?" And so she said, "Just write him a letter." So I wrote a letter that basically said, "I wasted your time. I realized too late that I was in the presence of greatness. And should we ever meet again, I'll know more about that prototype store than you do." And put it in the mail. And got a call 2 weeks later from the same recruiter who was thoroughly embarrassed by having put me in front of him the first time, who said to me, "I don't know why he wants to see you," because clearly Charles had never told him about the letter, "but he wants to meet you again." And then I was prepared. And I spent 10 wonderful years learning from an icon about retail.
It's interesting, though, being prepared is part of the lesson, but it also seems like for you, I mean, you made a mistake, and one of the things we talk about in Dale Carnegie is if you make a mistake, admit it quickly and emphatically, and that was really the turning point.
It was. Talk about learning from failure. It was a great lesson in not only being prepared, but reversing what seemed like something that couldn't be reversed and making lemonade out of lemons. So
What an incredible turnaround. So you got the job.
I got the job.
Tell us more. What happened after that?
It was our mission, and this was, Toys R Us was envied in many ways as Amazon is today at the time. And my job was to build and do to children's apparel what Toys R Us had done to the toy business. And basically the toy business was taken out of the department stores. And if you wanted a toy, you went to Toys R Us. So we were going to do in children's apparel what he did in toys. Now, the good news is that we had the benefit of seeing the model, but the challenge of growing from 0 to 250 stores across the country, and these were not small shops.
Is that what you did, 200, 0 to 250?
And they were 25 to 35,000 square foot stores.
Wow.
So these were large products. And we did it from zero. I mean, we had 3 people when I started the company. And we had our own floor in the Toys R Us building. And we had the support, obviously. We had the bank of Toys R Us behind us. But both in execution and personnel and rollout, it was a challenge.
So let me, just a little digression, but as you were growing from 0 to 250 stores, absolutely incredible story. What's one thing that if you were to point to, how did you do that? What's one thing that we could take away from that process?
It's a great question. I don't have an easy answer. The only answer I can give you is that we put a team together. We had a vision because they had done it. So it wasn't like we were trying to invent a new concept that didn't work. But we didn't know we couldn't do it. It's really, I think, the thing that drove us. We said, this is something that makes sense. We've seen it work in other areas. We can do it. The hardest part was really scaling up as quickly as we had to scale up. And we had to hire field people. We had to hire merchants. We had to hire finance and backroom people. But it was absolutely, if you go back and you say, what's the most fun you've ever had in retail? It was that time. It was the hardest I've ever worked. I didn't see my children grow up. I mean, that's a sad
talked
statement.
about that as a bit of a regret,
Yep.
but it couldn't have been any other way?
At the time,
What would you have done differently?
I don't think I could have done anything differently. I had a wonderful wife who understood what we were embarking on and knew it would be great for us long term, both professionally and financially. And she covered the bases that I couldn't. And I was on the road a lot looking at real estate and building a company. And as we both look back on it, it was a joyous time to bring something out of the ground and to life in that kind of scale. It was something that very few people get a chance to do.
Talk about the people a little bit. I mean, to go from 3 employees to, I don't know how many you had when you had 250 stores, right? Yeah. I mean, how did you motivate, inspire, build a culture in that company that supported that kind of growth and made it a thriving enterprise?
Well, the first key part was surrounding myself with an executive team that had the same energy and the same philosophy and the same style of behavior with people. Obviously different skill sets. We had to have HR, we had to have operations, we had stores, fields, but we all shared one common goal, which was we're going to do something that hasn't been done. And that's a motivator that's rare. I mean, very few people get to do something that's never been done before. And it brought us together as a team. And when we started to enjoy success, we didn't have to recruit people. People were recruiting us to come and join the fun.
Success breeds more success,
Yeah.
right? You kind of set that up and supported it. So fast forward a little bit. You made a decision to leave Toys R Us
Yes.
eventually. And what did you do next?
You talk about professionally, some of the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life was walking into Charles's office and telling him that, and this is after we had built it and we had 10 years of success, but I was a small division even with that to a $20 billion toy company, and I wasn't the CEO. I was the president of my division. And I had been approached by a large corporation who had an apparel division. And the analogy that I gave Charles, which didn't make him enjoy the conversation anymore, was that, Charles, I'm riding in the passenger seat of a Cadillac. This is a great company. I love it. It will always be part of my life. But I get a chance to drive a Ford. It's not a Cadillac, but I'll be the driver of the car as opposed to an important passenger. And he understood, and we stayed in touch. I went to his 91st birthday party long after he retired from Toys R Us, and we stayed close for all those years. But that was the most difficult professional decision I've ever made.
So you made it, though. What helped you get over the hump? You must have been afraid in some sense.
I was. I looked around, and Toys R Us was such a wonderful company that they had people that stayed there for life. And I asked myself, money is not an issue, comfort is not an issue, I enjoy the job. is this the only experience I want for the rest of my life? And I said, no, I think I need to grow. So something that you and I have talked about before, and certainly part of the Dale Carnegie culture, pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. And I knew if I was going to grow that I had to get uncomfortable, and and I achieved that.
Yeah. Well, but that's true, though, right? I mean, there's a great quote that everything we want is on the other side of fear, right? I mean, we really have to confront our fears if we ever want to grow, and growth and comfort don't coexist.
Yes.
You know, so fast forward us, if you will. So you took that job, everything went beautifully. I mean, how did that all work out, and what happened next?
Well, I knew I was stepping into a difficult situation, and they had told me we were part of a U.S. shoe company, and they owned, obviously, a shoe operation. They owned LensCrafters, and they owned...
Was this a turnaround by chance?
Yeah, this was a turnaround.
Okay.
My division was a turnaround. LensCrafters was running wonderfully well, but the apparel division, which was a collection of 1,500 mall stores under different names that your mother would know, Casual Corner, Petite Sophisticates, Papagallo, and a number of brands. And the apparel group was struggling. And my job when I was recruited was to come in and turn that group around. Unfortunately, in the end of my first year, we got approached by a hostile takeover from an Italian company who really wanted to buy the whole corporation just to get at LensCrafters because they were an optical company. And so in the midst of my dreams to turn around this wonderful apparel collection of brands, we were purchased finally in a hostile turned friendly takeover. And the owner of the Italian firm, Signor Leonardo Del Vecchio, I'll never forget the day. He flew into my offices. We're located in Enfield, Connecticut, and he didn't speak English. And so my goal was to take my part of the business and try to go to Bain and leverage it into a management buyout, because I knew that the acquiring company wanted to just get LensCrafters. And as it turned out, after a brief introduction, Senor Leonardo Del Vecchio said through his interpreter, he said, "I bought companies like yours in 19 different countries," and nodded to the interpreter, and I nodded to Senor Leonardo Del Vecchio. And then his second phrase, as I'm listening to him talk, smiling, and then the interpreter says, "And each time I buy a company, I replace the CEO with somebody who speaks Italian." And so my 4 years of Spanish really didn't work out well there. And so that was, and they were very honorable in how the transition.
But you were basically out of a position at that time.
Yeah. He brought his son in from Italy to run the company.
So you must, I mean, how did you feel at this point? I mean, you'd left the Cadillac, you got into the Ford. Now the Ford is, you're standing on the side of the road.
Financially, it was a windfall because the hostile takeover was more than generous to its shareholders. But personally and professionally, I felt regret and loss. It was a struggle.
Do you have any advice about how to cope with that? I mean, it's something, people face all the time, and we struggle as people with disappointment, things that don't work out the way that we hope. I mean, how did you find yourself able to kind of work through a tough spot?
I have a positive philosophy in life, and I've always believed, as it has happened and turned out, the old saying, when one door closes, another door opens. And while I was lamenting the fact that I didn't do something quick enough, or I wish they hadn't come along about the company, I got a call from a venture group who had gotten my name somehow, and they asked me if I was interested in running a company that they owned in California. And I met them, and they're a wonderful group of people. They had bought this company, an off-price company in San Diego, California. The negative was that we were very ensconced, and my kids were in 7th grade and 9th grade. And so the good news was I found an opportunity that was really exciting. It was in a place that I wanted to be. But my children had to leave their school and their friends, and that was never easy.
That's a tough situation.
Yeah.
Sure. One of the things that you talk about, I heard you speak to different groups, is you talk about learning from failure. Let's talk about that a little bit.
I take failure of any kind, whether it's an annual performance or in the case of the company that I wish I'd turned around more quickly, I take it personally, and I manage personally, I motivate personally, and I take failure personally. And what I've had to learn and now see as I'm older and wiser, that without failure, you don't get the opportunity to learn or grow. And if everybody's had a perfect life, I don't know who that is, but without that failure, I would not have been able to pursue some of the opportunities that have led to me having what I think is absolutely a blessed career.
Well, you have had a blessed career, an incredible career. So fast forward us over to the role that you had at Benjamin Moore, because it sounds like that was out of the blue, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's some very interesting circumstances in which you received a call, I think. Right?
I was at my son's wedding in September 21st, 2013, and I got a call. It was a friend that worked for Berkshire Hathaway, and I answered the phone, and I said, "Hi, Ted," and the voice on the other end said, "This is Warren Buffett." I naturally didn't believe the story, so I said, "Ted, I don't have time for this. My son is getting married." And then the voice goes, "Congratulations." And I'm like, "Oh my God, this is really Warren Buffett." And so he wanted to know if I was available to come to Omaha. He had been given my name by someone, and he had a company that he was interested in having me run. So I told my wife, and we were supposed to host a celebration for 250 people the next day as parents of the groom. And so my wife said, "Who was that on the phone?" I said, "It was Warren Buffett." And she said, "What does she want?" I said, "He wants me to come to Omaha tomorrow." And she said, "What did you say?" I said, "Absolutely, I'll be there." So I did not please my wife that day, but I got to meet him.
That couldn't have gone over well. So you attended the wedding, and then you
got on a plane to Omaha.
Wow. And what was that first meeting like?
I'm comfortable public speaking. I'm comfortable one-on-one. I was close to catatonic is the only way I can phrase it when I was in his office, because I've admired this man my entire professional life. I'm sitting in his office being interviewed for a job. I mean, that just doesn't happen. And so he said some pleasantries, and it was my turn to carry the conversation. And the only thing that came to my mind was I said, "Mr. Buffett, I have a quote of yours on the wall of every company that I've run." So I felt good. I was speaking. Mm-hmm. And so he said, "Well, what quote is that?" And I said, "You were asked at an investor conference, how do you select the companies in which you invest Berkshire Hathaway's money?" And he nodded, and he said, "What was my answer?" And I said, "Your answer, which I have framed, is that I buy companies that are so wonderful that even an idiot can run them, because sooner or later one will." So we laughed, we talked, and the interview got more technical about the opportunity at Benjamin Moore, but I was walking into a situation where there were two presidents in the course of a year that came and went. So the biggest challenge I had when I walked in the door was I wasn't a paint guy, and there were two people that preceded me that had created some level of chaos inside the company, and so my job was to quiet that down.
And how did you do that?
Well, I had one strike going against me because I was not a paint guy, and in the paint industry, if you didn't grow up in paint, you really shouldn't be talking about paint, much less running a paint company. So first of all, my style of how I deal with people was, the bar had been set rather low before me, so my natural style was a win in how I deal and communicate with people. And then I listened, and I didn't tell people what I knew. I didn't tell people what they should be doing. I spent 6 months doing nothing, and actually Warren's encouragement in that regard. I just listened and learned, asked a lot of questions, and when people are afraid of titles. And it doesn't matter how comfortable you are or how nice you are with people, people are afraid of titles. But I got them to a level of comfort over the course of time where I could get at the core issues and the core problems, and they were all fixable. I mean, there was no magic wand that I had to wave, but you just had to listen to the people and get them to a level where they would tell you what the problems were and how to fix them.
So the people issues can be tricky. You found that once you demonstrated that listening, that was, I mean, what kind of challenges did you have as you did that? And were you concerned at all about the urgency of the situation? I mean, you spent the time to listen.
Well, it was a profitable company. It's owned by Berkshire Hathaway, so there was no fears that, I had to
you had the luxury of time.
I had a luxury of time, absolutely. What I did see rather quickly is that there was some people in the executive team that I can see that they had a authoritarian, almost dictatorial style, and not through cooperation, but through intimidation. And my first job, after I assessed both the operating issues of our franchisees and dealers, was I realized if I'm going to remake this company into an image that I think is the right one, I'm going to have to make some changes. So I had the hard conversations with people, and unfortunately, the talents and skills they had were fine, but the manner in which they directed and dealt with people, cross-functionally and down, were totally out of line with the values.
Now, were you able to talk to them about that? In other words, to give them an opportunity? I mean, did they acknowledge or recognize that in themselves, or was it a blind spot? I mean, what?
Blind spot is the best way to say it. I say it as they had no emotional IQ. To be, in my opinion, to be a good executive, you have to be able to see how people see you. Regardless of your skill set, if you can't understand how you're being interpreted through how you're managing, if you don't see it, and that's the really hard problem with turning people over that really have no emotional IQ. They don't understand, they don't see the problem. And you can talk to them about it. You can say, look, this is how you're viewed. Look at the surveys. Look at the results of your group. Well, I work them really hard. That's why the ratings aren't.
That's a challenge, isn't it? I mean, and you've got some very, very talented people, but they can't necessarily see it, and they're not necessarily willing to change. And that seems like that's a career limiter, derailer.
And it's frustrating for them because to their mind and under different leadership, quite frankly, that type of behavior was not just okay, it was emulated. So suddenly I come in and they think, well, he just wants to be warm and fuzzy. And I said, no, it's not about being warm and fuzzy. It's being able to manage better when your people both trust and respect you as opposed to fear you. And some people can change and some people can't.
So Mike, let me ask you a little bit about your philosophy on people, because clearly there are different leadership styles, right? And in fact, you encountered one where someone said, hey, I'm just driving people hard, bringing out their best. That was that person's philosophy. You've got people who will talk about a tough leader, a Steve Jobs or whatnot, versus someone who might be more empathetic. They seem, soft and so forth. But talk a little bit about your philosophy about how to bring the best out in people. What have you done? What do you recommend?
First of all, the right team and the right people, you've got to have a basic set of skills that you come to the job with. For the teams that I've created, I have to believe that we are all in it together, that everybody believes in the talents and the trust and the skills of their partners. And if you've put the right team together and they've got the right commitment to each other, wonderful things happen.
And how do you as a leader set the standard for what that should be?
By the people you hire. If you hire people that are not only good at what their job skill is, but they're good with people, I've found that trust is built when people believe that you're honest with them and that you're direct with them and that you trust them and that you're open. There's nobody in any company I've ever run that can't knock on my door or walk in the door and have a conversation with me. There's nobody's name that I don't know, from the janitorial staff up to the senior leadership team. And when you have that kind of accessibility is the key. If people know that they can come to their boss or to their boss's boss or share a problem or an opportunity, all good things happen. So to me, that's critical to my success.
I mean, I'm hearing you talk about being accessible.
Yeah.
I'm hearing you talk about really creating a culture where people feel respected. I mean, even to the point where you know their name, you know something about them, you recognize them.
And in addition, transparency and informed. I share the results of our company all the way down to the lowest levels. They should know how we're doing. They should understand the challenges and the opportunities. And if you're transparent and you're accessible and you inform your population about what the opportunities and the strategy and the challenges are, good things happen.
So let me ask you, I just want to go a little further on this. It's probably easier to do that when things are going well. When things aren't going well, when the company is, maybe there's an economic issue or things are struggling, I mean, how do you balance transparency? How do you handle that?
Well, here's the wonderful benefit. If you have an organization that you've got that kind of trust already set, and people are cooperating in part of a team and they believe in their leaders and they want you to succeed. When the hard times come, and they always come, it's like, I look at it like an insurance policy. I've invested myself, our people have invested themselves in everybody in this company. And when the chips are down, those people will do whatever it takes to right the ship or get through the challenge. So you can't just walk in and do that. You've got to build that credibility. You've got to build that insurance. So the day when that storm comes and you say, I need you, they're going to be there.
Yeah, I mean, so your advice right now to managers, CEOs, I mean, things are pretty good right now. Thank goodness, right? But part of your advice is, I mean, both from an integrity standpoint, but also from a practical standpoint, I mean, this is a time to make sure that we're being open with people, building that foundation, building trust, letting them know where they stand, being accessible.
Absolutely. And the storm will come, and they will rise to the challenge.
That's awesome. So it's really even about developing a competitive advantage. I mean, really through people. Now, you've talked about culture is everything. Speak a little bit more about that.
Going back to the lessons from Warren, we all know that examples are set at the top. But if you ensure that the ethics and the values of the company are the right ones, and certainly at Berkshire they are, if you ensure that that message goes down not just to the CEO and not just to the leadership team, but as I said, I give what I consider a one-page statement that's a credo to live by from Warren Buffett to every new employee. And I say, if you stay with us a year, I hope you stay with us for your whole career. But if you stay with us for a year, take this with you to your next job. Because living by these values of honorableness, transparency, and the highest of ethics, you'll have a great career and a great life.
Phenomenal advice. Do you meet with every single new employee?
Absolutely. Day one.
And how many employees did you have at Benjamin Moore?
Well, we had 2 different facilities, 201 and then 400 in our main office. So
part of the, for lack of a better term, onboarding experience was a meeting with you?
Absolutely, one-on-one in the office. And to see, and many of these are young kids that are beginning their career, many of them are senior executives. But what's most fun is when the young ones come in and it's their first real job and they get to be in the office of the president. And you see that, you know that they're going to go home and they're going to sit down at the dinner table and they're going to say, you know what, I just had a half-hour conversation with the president of the company today. And that will stay with them for a very long time. And it sets a tone the day they walk in the door of the company.
Well, it sets a tone for them. It also sets a tone about who you are. Because as the president, the CEO of that company, for you to make the time for every new employee, irrespective of all the other things that you've got going on, really says something about how you feel about people.
I'd love to tell you it was a task, but it was a joy.
Great. Well, Mike, thank you so much for being with me today. It's been phenomenal.
My pleasure,
talking
Joe.
with you, and wishing you the best as always.
Thanks very much, Joe.
I hope you enjoyed this edition of Take Command, a Dale Carnegie podcast. This episode was recorded by Robin Berghaus and edited and mixed by Justin D. Wright of Seaplane Armada. Please consider rating this episode and subscribing to us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts.